I am 85 years old. For 45 of those years, I sat at the table of power inside one of the most controlled religious organizations on earth. I was an elder of Jehovah's Witnesses. I had authority over who could marry, who would be deemed worthy of salvation, and who would be cast out, shunned, erased, treated as already dead. I enforced rules that separated children from their parents and parents from their children. I kept records. I followed protocols. I made phone calls to lawyers in Brooklyn before I ever called the police. And I want you to know, before I die, what those protocols cost. There is a boy in a photograph on my desk. He is smiling. He died alone. His name was Thomas. He was my son. And the last time he called me, I told him to come back to Jehovah instead of coming home to his father. I am telling you this truth now because the truth is all I have left, and because the Jesus I found at 83 years old, not the diminished figure they invented, but the living Son of God, has asked me to speak. If you are watching this, please stay. Please witness this with me. And if you know someone still inside those walls, share what you hear. What I carry has been hidden for too long. The first thing you need to understand is how real it felt. How right. How absolutely, completely right it all felt. I was 22 years old when I was baptized into the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. I remember the pool at the back of the assembly hall. I remember the water closing over my head and thinking, this is it. This is the family I was always meant to have. My father drank himself into an early grave. My mother was absent in every way that mattered, emotionally, physically, spiritually. The Kingdom Hall offered me something neither of them could ever give me: certainty, order, a world explained down to its last syllable, with a rule for every question and an answer for every doubt. There was no mystery. There was no ambiguity. Everything had been decided, sorted, organized by men who claimed to speak directly for God. By 30, I was a ministerial servant. By 38, an elder. They called it a privilege of service. I called it a calling. I wore that title like a second skin, like armor, like the clothes of a man who finally knew exactly who he was. I believed, with everything in me, with a faith so complete it bordered on possession, that Jehovah had chosen me personally, that the organization, capital O, always capital O, was the only channel through which God communicated with humanity. That outside those walls, beyond the congregation, there was nothing but darkness and deception, enemies, apostates, the spiritually weak and morally corrupt. I was diligent, obsessively so. I studied the publications more than I studied anything else. The Watchtower, The Awake, the bound volumes of meeting materials that lined the wall of my study like scripture, like a wall of truth that nothing could penetrate. I had not read the Bible independently, truly independently, without the Society's interpretation guiding every single sentence, every phrase, every word choice, since before my baptism. I did not know what I did not know, and I had been trained subtly and relentlessly to believe that not knowing was a form of spiritual protection, that to question was to fall, that intellectual curiosity was a path to damnation. The congregation respected me. They came to me with their problems, their doubts, their children. I led judicial committees. I counseled marriages that I had no real training to counsel. I sat across from parents whose children had left the organization and told them with complete conviction, with a certainty that came from 45 years of institutional faith, that their pain was a test from Jehovah, that their obedience, their willingness to shun their own son or daughter was an act of divine love. I believed that. I said it again and again to dozens of families, and every time I said it, I convinced myself more completely. It felt like compassion. It was not compassion. It was compliance dressed in the language of grace. We went door to door in every weather, rain, snow, blistering heat. I remember winter mornings, knocking on strangers' doors, my fingers numb, holding my literature bag like a talisman, certain, absolutely certain, that I was carrying the only message that could save the person standing on the other side of that door. Not metaphorical salvation. We taught literal salvation. Armageddon was imminent. The society had said so, and though the specific dates had quietly passed, had been revised again and again, the urgency had never diminished. I told children that they might not survive to see their own graduation, that their secular ambitions, college, careers, personal dreams, were a form of spiritual vanity. I believed all of it, completely, without reservation. My wife Miriam was a quiet woman who nodded at everything I said from across our dinner table and smiled from the third row during my platform talks. I told myself her silence was peace. I understand now that it was fear. I understand now that she was suffocating. I praised her publicly for her submission and never once in 42 years of marriage asked what she thought, what she wanted, what she might be. We had 2 children, Ruth, who married a brother from the congregation at 19 and lives inside those walls still obedient, still afraid, and Thomas asked questions from the time he could form them. Why can't we celebrate birthdays? Why can't we have a blood transfusion? Why does Jehovah allow Armageddon to kill our neighbors, our cousins, our friends? I answered him with publications, with patience at first, then with warnings. His curiosity frightened me in a way I could not name. Looking back now, I know exactly what I was afraid of. I was afraid he would find something real, something that contradicted what I had built my entire life upon, something that would unravel the fabric of certainty I had wrapped around myself so tightly. At 16, on a Tuesday evening in May, he sat across from me at the kitchen table and told me quietly, without anger or drama, just the simple truth of it, that he did not believe. I remember the light through the window behind him, the way it caught the side of his face. I remember thinking that the boy sitting there was a stranger wearing my son's face. I did not recognize him. And the truth was, he did not recognize me either. I did not reach for him. I did not ask what he needed or what had led him to this place. I reached for the phone to call the congregation overseer. I picked it up with my hand shaking, and I made the call that began the machinery that would eventually destroy my relationship with my son. That is who I was. That is what I had become. And the most frightening thing, the thing I carry with me still in my chest like a stone, is how ordinary that choice felt. How completely right. How much it felt like the only option available to a man of faith. What they do not show you when you first walk into a kingdom hall is the machinery behind the calm. They show you the rows of chairs, the brothers in ties, the sisters in modest dresses, the children sitting still with their highlighted Bibles. They show you a room that feels like the eye of a storm, orderly, certain, peaceful. You think you have found the only honest place in a dishonest world. You think you have finally come home, but I was an elder. Elders see the machinery. Elders are the machinery. The first judicial case involving sexual abuse was brought to me when I was 39 years old. A 17-year-old girl in our congregation came forward and told us that a ministerial servant had been abusing her for 2 years. He was 34, married, with 3 young children. He had served in the congregation for 12 years. Everyone trusted him. He was a regular pioneer. He gave wonderful talks. He was the kind of man the organization held up as an example. I sat in the back room of the Kingdom Hall with 2 other elders, and we followed the protocol exactly, precisely, without deviation. We asked about the 2-witness requirement. Were there any witnesses to what had occurred? There were not. We asked about her own conduct. Had she been alone with him voluntarily? Had she dressed immodestly? Had she given him any encouragement, any sign? I watched her face while we asked those questions. I remember the way her eyes fixed on the wall, the way she stopped blinking, the way her jaw set tight and her hands clenched in her lap. She was 17 years old, and 3 adult men were asking her what she had done to cause this, what her responsibility was in the abuse of her own body. We did not disfellowship him. We could not, according to protocol, without 2 witnesses. We found insufficient evidence. We counseled both parties to avoid each other. We did not call the police. We did not speak to him again after that meeting. We had been instructed explicitly in letters from the branch office that I read with my own eyes, printed on official society stationery in that gray officious font, that matters of this nature were internal, that contacting secular authorities would bring reproach upon Jehovah's name, that we were to call the society's legal department first, before anything else. I called them. I sat in that back room and I made the call to Brooklyn, and I was given instructions. I followed them to the letter. I told myself I was protecting the congregation, protecting Jehovah's organization. What I was actually doing was protecting a corporation's legal standing while leaving a child unprotected, while returning her to a congregation where her abuser still attended meetings, still gave talks, still was presented as a righteous brother. There were 3 more cases in 45 years, 3 more children, 3 more rooms. 3 more times I picked up the phone and called Brooklyn instead of the police. 3 more times I was told what to do by lawyers and administrators hundreds of miles away. 3 more times I obeyed. Each time the instructions were the same. Each time I followed them. Each time I told myself I was protecting the congregation. What I was actually doing, I understand now, was protecting a system that valued institutional reputation more than human safety, more than the bodies of children. The letters were careful documents. They instructed elders to send documentation related to abuse allegations directly to the society's legal department. They specified that correspondence was confidential. They used the language of Scripture to justify policies designed by lawyers. They were corporate policies wrapped in the language of faith. I kept those letters in a locked drawer in my study. I still have some of them. I have looked at them in the last 2 years, and I have felt shame so complete it is difficult to breathe. Thomas found out, not everything, but enough. Pieces. Fragments that he assembled into something too large to ignore. He had a friend whose family left the congregation suddenly when the boy was 15. Thomas heard fragments from him, overheard conversations. He did research. The kind I had spent his entire childhood warning him was apostate and spiritually dangerous. He spent nights on his computer looking at information I had taught him to fear. And then one evening, when he was 17, he came to me and he asked me directly about the 2-witness rule. He named the girl. He had known her since they were small, since Kingdom Hall children's meetings when they were 7 and 8 years old. I told him that critics of the organization were tools of Satan, that apostates twisted truth to weaken Jehovah's people, that the information he had found was spiritually poisonous, and he was risking his salvation by looking at it. He said, "A girl in this congregation was hurt, and the man who hurt her is still here giving talks." I told him the matter had been handled according to Jehovah's law, according to the protocol. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "I don't think you believe that." He was right, but I could not let myself know he was right. I had 45 years of my life staked on the organization being what it claimed to be. The cost of admitting otherwise was everything: my identity, my purpose, my marriage, my place in the world, my understanding of God, everything. He left the room. He was 18. I did not follow him. I did not go to his room. I did not knock on his door. I sat in my study with my publications, and I told myself I had done the right thing. I did not follow him for 11 more years. The disfellowshipping announcement was made on a Thursday evening in September. I remember the exact date. September 14th. I will remember it forever. Thomas had sent a letter to the elder body. I did not know he was going to send it until I was sitting on the platform and the presiding overseer held the paper. The letter stated that Thomas no longer accepted the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses and wished to be formally disassociated. It was a quiet, dignified letter, professional, respectful in its finality. I read it afterward, alone in the Kingdom Hall bathroom, with the door locked and my hand over my mouth. The overseer read the announcement to the congregation. Thomas, surname, is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. 7 words, 3 seconds. He was erased, removed from the record, deleted from the fellowship of the saved. The congregation did not gasp, did not mourn. They adjusted the way water adjusts when a stone is removed. The ripples closed. By the following week, he was simply absent from the social architecture of their lives. No one spoke his name. No one asked about him. It was as if he had been digitally removed from existence. Miriam cried for 3 days. I held her, but I said nothing. She said, "We need to reach out to him." And I said, "No, we do not." I told her it was a spiritual test. I told her that our refusal to contact Thomas was an act of divine love, that the pain of exclusion might be the thing that brought him back to Jehovah. I had said those words to other parents. Now I was saying them to my wife. They sounded the same. They felt different. They meant nothing. The first time Thomas called, 6 months after the announcement, I let it ring. I watched Miriam move toward the phone. I put my hand on her arm. We stood in the kitchen while it rang and then stopped. The silence after was worse than the ringing. It was the sound of a door closing. Or he called on birthdays, on Christmas that we pretended we did not celebrate, on holidays we told ourselves meant nothing. On ordinary Tuesdays that meant nothing except that he was thinking of us, that he had not forgotten us, that he still somehow wanted his parents. We did not answer. Each time I told myself we were holding the door open for his return by making the cost of staying outside feel real, by making him feel the weight of what he had chosen. I did not know that what I was actually doing was teaching him that love was conditional, that belonging required obedience, that his parents would trade him for a rule book. I know now what that cost felt like to him. He was 18 years old when we cut him off. 18 years old with no college education. The organization had discouraged higher education as a distraction from spiritual goals, and no connections outside the congregation that had just expelled him. His entire social world was behind the door we had locked against him. He had no one. He was alone in the world, and it was because we had made him that way. He struggled. I know this now from the letters Miriam had been sending him secretly for years, letters I discovered the day she told me he was dead, and from conversations with his friends that came too late. He suffered from depression. He was drowning. He moved apartments repeatedly. He was trying to build a life from nothing in a world he had never been prepared for, entirely alone, with no one to call. He had no family, no congregation, no identity, nothing but the knowledge that he had been discarded. He called me one last time on a Sunday evening in February. He was 27 years old. His voice was different, quieter, further away, like it was coming from a place I could not reach. "Dad," he said, "I'm not okay." I asked him if he was ready to speak with the elders about returning to the congregation, if he was willing to repent. Those were the only words I had left. Those were the only thing I could offer. He was quiet for a moment. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line. I heard a sound like he was crying, but he was trying to hide it. Then he said, "Is that the only thing you can say to me?" I said, "I love you, Thomas." But I cannot maintain a relationship with you while you are living outside of Jehovah's arrangement. If you return, everything can be restored. He said, okay. He said it the way a door closes quietly, without drama, without anger, just closed, the connection broken, the possibility ended. 4 months later, his landlord called his emergency contact, Miriam. She came into my study on a Wednesday afternoon where I was reading The Watchtower, and she stood in the doorway and she say,